Welcome to the New Horizons Small Group. For this, the second Sunday of November. This quarter, we are using the Explore the Bible curriculum. We are using the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. We have completed our study of Numbers. We're now into the book of Deuteronomy. This is our third session, I believe, in the book of Deuteronomy. This is session number 10, and it is entitled Undivided Worship, and we're in Deuteronomy chapter 12. So Explore the Bible curriculum, books of Numbers and Deuteronomy, session 10, entitled Undivided Worship, and we're in Deuteronomy chapter 12. As we begin, as I generally do, let's take a quick moment and look at some review. The book of Deuteronomy is the fifth of the 5 books known as the Law of Moses in the New Testament, or known as the Pentateuch. They are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Genesis, we find out who created everything, and therefore who owns and controls everything, and that is God Almighty. As we ended the book of Genesis, the family of Jacob has moved down to Egypt to join his son Joseph, who is currently second in command in the empire of Egypt. And about 70 individuals moved down. It's been a couple of hundred years when we get to the beginning of the book of Exodus, and the nation of Israel has grown to such an extent that the Egyptians view them as a threat to their security. So therefore they have enslaved them, and they have made them builders and workers for them. As the book begins, we have Moses come to lead the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And as the book ends, they are at the base of Mount Sinai. The book of Leviticus basically takes place totally at the base of Mount Sinai, and it is God giving the people of Israel the rules, commands, edicts that they need for worshiping Him in a proper manner, but also the rules to live together as a nation. Then in the book of Numbers, we find that there's a census taken of the people, and they get ready to move into the Promised Land. However, when they get to the Promised Land and they send the spies out to check it out, they discovered that there are some very strong kingdoms already existing in Canaan, and 10 of the 12 spies come back and say, "We can't take the land." Consequently, the book of Numbers talks about the 40 years of desert wilderness wandering of the people of Israel because of their failure to follow God's lead in taking their promised land. As the book of Numbers ends, they are back at the southern border of Canaan, and they are getting ready now to enter the promised land, and this is the second generation from the time that they have left Egypt. So the book of Deuteronomy then is Moses' final addresses to the people of Israel. It is a recounting of the law. It's not a new law, it's a recounting of the law. It's a book that talks about why we are here and what we need to be doing as we move into the promised land, how we should live in a covenant relationship with God. And the book of Deuteronomy has 3 major themes. The first theme is a call for complete, undivided obedience and devotion to God. In our last couple of sessions, we have seen that theme prominently displayed in what Moses has been talking about. In the first session, he talks about the history of how they got here. In the second session, he talks about the need for complete obedience and devotion to God, and the important, second theme, and the importance of teaching those precepts to the children, to the next generation, and to the next generation after that. And the third theme, which is somewhat in today's lesson, but continues on in the rest of the book, is an emphasis on the holiness of God and how to properly worship God. And we're going to talk about the proper worship of God today. So as we left the folks last time, they are sitting at the entrance to the southern part of Canaan, And now, again, Moses is re-emphasizing everything that's gone on before. And as we begin today, he's going to talk about how you should properly worship God. So I have a question for you as we start. How many of you have heard something similar to this? I don't have to go to church to worship. I can worship just as well on the golf course, hiking in the mountains, or walking along the seashore. After all, God is everywhere. Ever heard that? If you haven't, I'm a little surprised, because I've heard that from a number of people in several different iterations. So is it important to be a worshiper of God in a certain place? In other words, is it important to be part of a church fellowship? Or can you be a Lone Ranger Christian? As I've said many times before in our small group, God doesn't call us to be Lone Rangers. He calls us to be part of a community that worships God faithfully. So what does Moses have to say to the children of Israel today as they look at moving in and as they look at what God has to say about being faithful worshipers in a community of worshipers? We're in Deuteronomy chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 1 to 7 to start with. And as I generally do, we will start by reading the NIV version, and then I'll talk from the Holman version. So here's the NIV version of Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 1 to 7. These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess. As long as you live in the land, destroy completely all the places on the high mountains and on the hills and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn the Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods and wipe out their names from those places. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, but you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. There in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your family shall eat, and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because the Lord your God has blessed you. So let's see what the Holman has to say. So here's the Holman version of these verses, starting at verse 1. Be careful to follow these statutes and ordinances in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess all the days you live on the earth. If you'll remember our last session, Moses emphasized several times to be careful to obey or to be careful to follow the commands, decrees, edicts, laws, several different kind of words that the Lord your God has given you. And if you remember, the word when he talks about to listen or to hear means to act on them, to follow what they've said. So here again in Deuteronomy chapter 12, Moses is again talking about the need to carefully follow what the Lord your God has established as the right way to worship and also the right way to live in community. And notice that it is an enduring set of laws. It says these are the laws and edicts and commands of the Lord, the God of your fathers, and that you are to do them for as long as you live on the earth. So it's not something we do today and change tomorrow. They were written in stone then, and later God talks about them being written on the hearts of men. They are laws that continue from then to now and into the future. They're not something that changes on a daily basis. They are things that are going to be applicable no matter when you live, what time frame, or where. But notice what he says to do about the culture in which they're going to be living. Verse 2. Destroy completely all the places where the nations you are driving out worship their gods. On the high mountains, on the hills, and under every flourishing tree. The words in the Hebrew when it says destroy completely are very emphatic. It's a command. It's not do it halfway. Do it all the way. Totally annihilate all the idols that you find in the land. Whether they are on the high mountains, whether they're on hills, whether they are under a flourishing tree. The Canaanites believed that if they worshipped on a mountaintop or on a high hill, they were closer to their God. The Israelites didn't need to worship on a high hill to be close to God. He was with them already. And likewise, we today should acknowledge that God is with us every day, no matter where we are. So the initial statement I said is true. God is everywhere. But he doesn't call us to worship him everywhere. As we go through these verses, he's going to talk about a specific place that we should worship him. Verse 3 says, tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, burn up their Asherah poles, cut down the carved images of their gods, and wipe out their names from every place. That's pretty specific. Take it and destroy it completely. Annihilate all of the gods and all of the idols that you worship for those gods. There's to be nothing left. Verse 4 says, don't, again an emphatic, don't worship the Lord your God this way. God's expectation is that we are to follow him and to worship him in the way he prescribes. The Israelites are basically being commanded to go back and look at what God said back in the book of Leviticus, when he talked about the way to worship God in holiness and to draw closer to him. They were to be radically different than the culture they lived in. The Canaanite culture's kingdoms worshiped multiple gods, just like they did in Egypt. The Israelites were to be monotheistic. They were to worship one God in the place that he chose as he told them to worship. Not make up your own rules, but follow the rules that I have given you for worship. Verse 5, instead of worshiping like a Canaanite, do it this way. Instead, you must go to the place the Lord your God chooses from all the tribes to put his name for his dwelling. So where is that? Well, they haven't conquered the land yet. So God hasn't chosen a place. So where is he now? Well, he's with the tabernacle. So their worship of God should be at the tabernacle. After they have conquered the land, they move the tabernacle in, and the tabernacle is going to be in several different places over the history of Israel. But the tabernacle was the place that God put his name, and that was where he dwelled, and that was where the people of Israel would go to worship. Up until the point that Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. Then the temple in Jerusalem was the place they were to go to worship. Notice verse 6. Again, very specific instructions here. You are to bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tenths and personal contributions, your vow offerings and free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. So every kind of offering, for whatever reason it was given, was all to be given at the location that God designated as the place of worship, to include bringing the firstborn of the flocks and the firstborn of the cattle as sacrificial offerings. Verse 7 says, you will eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, and rejoice with your household in everything you do, because the Lord your God has blessed you. Implicit in this verse is the idea that worship should be a family affair. Now, not only is a biological family called to worship together, but our religious family is called to worship together. And it says we are to eat there in the presence of the Lord. So the idea of having meals at church is pretty biblical. We are to be a fellowship which cares for each other, who worships together, who live together in community. The Lord knew that moving into this land, even after they had destroyed the idols, even if they had driven out most of the nations that were living there were going to be some left over. And there was going to be a distraction for the children of Israel to maybe do some of the worship practices of their neighbors. So God is telling them, get rid of all these distractions so that you're not distracted from the way you should be worshiping me. So let's go on to verses 8 to 11 and see what God has to say in addition to this. Verse 8 in the verse 8 in the NIV to begin with, says, you are not to do as we do here today, everyone as he sees fit, since you have not reached the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God is giving you. But you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies around you so that you will live in safety. Then to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, there you are to bring everything I command you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, and all the choice possessions you have vowed to the Lord. So Holman says the following, verse 8, you are not to do as we are doing here today. Everyone is doing what seems right in his own eyes. The words that Moses is giving to the Israelites here point towards the future. Because as we get into the book of Judges, one of the verses in Judges says, and the people did whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. They didn't follow what God commanded. They did what they thought was right. They followed their rules for worship, their rules for living. They were to commit themselves to the commands that God gave them at Mount Sinai in the book of Leviticus. Now, as they come into the promised land later, Moses calls on them to recommit themselves to this covenant. But for right now, he's just reminding them, you have made a covenant. Don't do it how you think it should be done. Do it as God has instructed us to do. Look at verse 9. Indeed, you have not yet come into the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God is giving you. No, they're not ready to be resting yet. They've still got to conquer the land. They've still got to tear down all the idols. They've still got to drive out all of the nations that are there in front of them. But eventually, the land will be theirs. They will have settled in it, and they will have rest and security. They will have rest. They will not have to fight anymore. They will have security to grow their crops and follow their herds. And it's all because this is an inheritance from the Lord your God. This is something your God has given you as he promised your forefathers, as he promised your ancestors, back beginning with Abraham. Verses 10 and 11. When you cross the Jordan and live in the land the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all the enemies around you, and you live in security. So when the land is conquered, things are secure, things are quiet, you're good, then the Lord your God will choose the place to have his name dwell. So think about it for a minute. When did they ever get to that point? It took them till the time of King Solomon to have total rest and security. And when was the temple built? When did God dwell in the temple? When Solomon built it in Jerusalem. So all the way through Joshua, Judges, and the other books up till we get to the Kings, which Solomon is the ruler, there's still fighting going on. There's still no rest for them as they have tried to settle the land and live in it in peace. But once they've done that, then the Lord your God will choose the place to have his name dwell, Jerusalem in the temple. And then notice he reiterates, I believe it was verse 6, but he reiterates, bring there everything I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, offerings of the tenth, personal contributions, and all your choice offerings you vow to the Lord. So once this is all done, bring the offerings that you were doing before at the tabernacle, bring them to the temple where my name dwells, where my presence will be felt. And then in Deuteronomy 12 through 28, which we won't read, but what Moses does here is he continues to talk about the different ways that the Canaanites worship their gods, and to continue to tell the Israelites, this is not how you are to do it. And then he wraps it up in verses 29 through the end of the chapter. So let's look at 29 through 32. Okay, from the NIV version, 29 to 32. The Lord your God will cut off before you the nations you are about to invade and dispossess. But when you have driven them out and settled in their land, and if they have been destroyed before you, be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? We will do the same. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, because in worshiping their gods they do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods. See that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it. So Moses has just spent the last 12 through 28 verses talking about the detestable practices of the Canaanites. And now he's summing it all up. In verse 29, he says, when the Lord your God annihilates the nations before you, so when he completely destroys all of the heathen nations that are idolatries, which you have entered to take possession of, and you drive them out and live in their land, when you are settled, be careful not to be ensnared by their ways after they have been destroyed before you. Do not inquire about their gods, asking, how did these nations worship their gods? I'll also do the same. So there's two aspects of the conquest of Canaan here. First, God's going to do it, but he's going to use the Israelites to do it. The Israelites are God's instrument of judgment against the nations of Canaan because of their idolatry and their detestable practices. So he's going to judge them, he's going to destroy them, and he's going to use the Israelites to do it. And now as Moses finishes out this particular chapter, this particular address, he's making the point to make sure you do not follow how they worshiped. And he's listed all the ways that are detestable. Notice he says, be careful to do this. In other words, pay attention. It is important that you notice what it is that they are doing. And when it says don't inquire or don't ask, it means to make a detailed examination of what they did. In other words, don't study their practices. Their practices are not for you. Your practices are what Yahweh God has given you as the correct way to worship him. So therefore, ignore all of these other practices. Verse 31, you must not do the same to the Lord your God. In other words, don't practice worship of God as the Canaanites worship their God. Because they practice for their gods every detestable thing the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Now that sounds pretty gruesome to us, but a practice of the Canaanite nations was to sacrifice children in the worship of God. And sorry to say, we get over into the Judges, and the Israelites, some, not all, but some of the Israelites did practice the worship practices of the Canaanites. They worshiped under spreading trees. They worshiped on high mountains, on high hills. They built altars there to worship, rather than worshiping at the tabernacle. And worst of all, they in fact did sacrifice their children to the gods. Verse 32, you must be careful to do everything I command you. Do not add anything to it or take anything away from it. So he is repeating from what he said in previous chapters. God has given you the rules. Do not add anything to it. I've told you the right way to do it. And most importantly, don't take anything away from it. Don't you decide which of these rules, laws, commands are good. Do them all. Practice them all. God has promised a military victory against all these nations. So you're going to possess the land. But once you're in, be careful of spiritual distractions. Distractions that take you away from the worship of God and bring you to the worship of the idols that you are destroying. Be careful to adhere to what God has taught while you were at Mount Sinai. So what happens next? Well, we're going to take a quick look at Deuteronomy 13 through Deuteronomy 26. These chapters are not part of our study of the book, but they have some interesting things to tell us. So in Deuteronomy 13, Moses continues to tell the people to shun idolatry. They're going to find it throughout the land. Don't let it be a distraction. Destroy it and worship God as he has told you. In Deuteronomy 14, he talks to the people again about the laws that deal with dietary restrictions, what are clean and unclean animals. In Deuteronomy 15, he talks about compassion and the forgiveness of debts every 7th year, the year of Jubilee. In Deuteronomy 16, he talks about the needs for the nation to gather as one for 3 specific festivals. The first is the Festival of Unleavened Bread, which is associated with Passover. That was the freeing of Israel from Egypt. So everybody needs to gather at the temple for this particular feast. The Feast of Weeks, which is celebrating the spring harvest, and the Feast of Tabernacles, which celebrates the fall harvest. These should be total nation, total family celebrations at the temple. In Deuteronomy 17, he talks about having the need to follow justice and compassion in the application of the laws. In Deuteronomy 18, he warns to be aware of false prophets and spiritualists. In other words, people who come in and claim to have a message from God, but don't. They are distractions, so be warned about them. In Deuteronomy 19, they establish cities of refuge. These are cities where people can go for protection if they accidentally, unintentionally murder someone or kill someone. In Deuteronomy 20, God even goes so far as to tell them this is how you fight your battles. These are the ways you fight a war. In Deuteronomy 21 to Deuteronomy 25, there is a continuing list of topics that talk about how to treat people and how to have compassion to others. And then in Deuteronomy 26, he again talks about gathering the first fruits and bring them to the temple as offerings. So again, Moses is spending all of Deuteronomy remembering and helping the Israelites to remember what it was God has done for them, and telling them, remember all this when the land is yours, and worship God as he has directed you to worship. Good idea for the rest of us as well. We are not meant to be lone rangers. We are meant to be a community, a family of believers who worship together, hold each other accountable, and go through life as one. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the day. We thank you for the message you have from this word. We ask that you help us to be a community of believers that follow you, worship you as you want. Help us to do that not only when we gather together on Sunday, but as we go through life the other 6 days of the week. For we ask it in your name. Amen.